There is a moment coming for almost everyone watching this video right now, and most people never see it arrive until they are already standing inside it. A Stanford research team spent 7 years tracking over 100 people, measuring more than 100,000 different molecules and microbes in their bodies, collecting over 200 million data points, and when they finally lined it all up, they expected to see aging show up the way everyone assumes it does, as a slow, gentle, gradual slope. Instead, they found something almost nobody is talking about, that the majority of what changes inside your body does not drift downward a little every year. It sits still for a long stretch and then suddenly lurches, in two specific bursts, one in the mid-40s and one much sharper one around age 60, which means aging does not behave like a slope at all, it behaves like a staircase, and there is one very large, very unforgiving step waiting at 60, and by the end of this video you are going to know exactly what is hiding on that step, why it fools even healthy, active, disciplined people, and what you can actually do starting today so that when you reach it, you walk up it instead of falling through it. I want to tell you about a man in my life I'll call Marcus, because his story is the reason I made this video at all. Marcus is 62. He has walked his dog every single morning for over 15 years, rain or shine. He has never in his adult life carried extra weight. His diet, by most standards, would be called clean. And about 3 months ago, Marcus sat across from me and said something that has stuck with me ever since. He said he feels like he is wading through wet cement by 2 in the afternoon, and the part that genuinely disturbed him was that nothing had changed. Same walks. Same meals. Same routine he had followed for over a decade. Nothing changed, and yet everything felt different. If you are watching this and some version of that sentence just landed in your chest, I want you to actually hear what I am about to say, because it matters more than almost anything else in this video. Your body is not broken. Your body is blocked. Those are two very different problems, and they call for two very different solutions, and most people spend years trying to fix the wrong one. Marcus went to his doctor. His labs came back looking fine. And that is not because his doctor missed something or because Marcus was imagining his own exhaustion. It is because a standard blood panel was built to catch disease, not to catch decline. There is a wide, quiet gap between not sick and actually thriving, and an enormous number of people in their 60s fall into that gap and stay there for years, sometimes for the rest of their lives, simply because nobody ever showed them the staircase or told them where the step was. A person can walk out of a routine checkup with a completely clean bill of health and still fight the exact same afternoon fatigue day after day, with nothing on that paperwork explaining why. And once you understand that, you stop quietly blaming yourself for a problem your blood work was never designed to catch. Here is what actually caught the attention of the Stanford researchers in the first place, and I think this detail alone is worth sitting with for a second. The risk of things like Alzheimer's disease and cardiovascular disease does not rise in a smooth, predictable line as people get older. Under 60, the risk climbs gradually, the way you'd expect. But somewhere around that age, it stops climbing gradually and starts rising sharply. Think about what that actually implies. If aging itself were a smooth downward slope, disease risk should track it and rise just as smoothly. It doesn't. Which tells us something specific is happening at a specific window in time, not just a general, formless getting older. And when the research team went looking for what exactly shifts hardest in that window, one system kept surfacing above all the others: immune function. Hang on to that thread, because it comes back later and it ties everything else in this video together. For now, let's get into the 5 things that are quietly working against you the moment you cross that step, because once you can see them, you can plan around every single one of them. The first hidden reason is what I call the muscle cliff, and almost nobody warns people about how steep it actually is. You have technically been losing a small amount of muscle since your 30s. It happens slowly enough that you never notice, because you can still carry the groceries, still climb the stairs, still open the jar. After 60, that slow leak does not just continue at the same pace, it accelerates, and the part that genuinely shocked me when I first read the research is how violently fast it accelerates the moment you stop moving entirely. In one study, researchers took a group of healthy older adults, average age around 67, people who were not sick, not frail, not hospitalized for anything serious, and put them on strict bed rest for just 10 days. 10 days. In that short window, these healthy older adults lost nearly a full kilogram of lean muscle out of their legs alone. Their leg strength dropped. Their power output dropped. Their aerobic capacity fell by roughly 12%. And when researchers compared this to what happens to younger adults under the exact same bed rest conditions, the older adults lost lean tissue somewhere between 3 and 6 times faster. Now map that onto an actual life. You catch a bad flu and you're down for a week. You have a minor procedure and you're couch-bound for 10 days. You take a relaxing cruise where you mostly sit. You have a rough winter and skip the gym for a stretch. At 35, your body absorbs that hit and mostly bounces back within a week or two without you even thinking about it. At 65, that same 10-day window can hand you a permanent withdrawal from your muscle bank account, unless you deliberately go back and repay it. Most people never do. They just quietly assume this is what being older feels like, and they adjust their expectations downward instead of adjusting their behavior. This, more than almost anything else, is what produces that sudden decline feeling people describe. It is rarely one dramatic event. It is a slow accumulation of 10-day windows that were never repaid. What makes this especially dangerous is how invisible it is while it's happening. There's no alarm, no ache, just the body quietly adapting downward to whatever demand you place on it, until you try something that used to be effortless and it suddenly isn't. So here is what actually works. You don't need a gym membership, though it certainly helps. You need your legs under real load at least twice a week, no exceptions. Simple sit-to-stand repetitions from a regular chair. Carrying something heavy, groceries, a loaded backpack, even a stack of books. Walking hills instead of flat ground when you can. Wearing a light-weighted vest on your regular walk. And the single most important rule in this entire section, after any illness, any minor surgery, any week stuck on the couch, that first week back on your feet is not optional recovery time you can skip if you're feeling lazy. It is a repayment window, and treating it as optional is exactly how healthy 60-year-olds quietly become frail 70-year-olds without ever falling once. The second hidden reason is one that tends to frustrate people the first time they hear it, because they genuinely feel like they are doing everything right, and in a sense they're just aiming at the wrong target. When you eat protein, your muscle tissue is supposed to receive a clear signal that essentially says build. The amino acid leucine is largely responsible for flipping that switch on. In a younger person, somewhere around 20 to 25 grams of quality protein, roughly 2 to 3 grams of leucine, is usually enough to flip that switch fully. After 60, that exact same meal often barely moves the needle. Researchers gave this phenomenon a name, anabolic resistance, meaning the muscle's reduced ability to respond efficiently to protein, to amino acids, to insulin, and even to exercise itself. Same signal, same effort, but fewer receptors picking up the call. Here's the part that most general nutrition advice gets wrong. A lot of guidance for older adults simply says eat a bit more protein, full stop, and leaves it there. But when researchers actually tested this properly, the typical dose used in older adult studies was around 20 grams, essentially a normal-sized meal's worth of protein, and that dose consistently failed to produce a strong muscle-building response. When the dose was raised to somewhere between roughly 25 and 40 grams of high-quality, leucine-rich protein, muscle protein synthesis in older adults was restored to levels much closer to what you'd see in someone decades younger. Your machinery is not broken. It is simply harder to reach, and the signal has to be louder than it used to be. Think about Marcus again for a second. His typical breakfast was a bowl of oatmeal with a splash of milk, maybe 8 grams of protein, and not the most bioavailable kind. He genuinely believed he was eating healthy, and by most conventional standards, he was. But his muscles received almost no usable signal that morning. Lunch was a small sandwich, another quiet, muted signal. By the time dinner rolled around at 7, his body finally got one real wake-up call for the entire day. One phone call to his muscles, once every 24 hours, and he wondered why he felt like he was fading by early afternoon. So here is the practical shift. Stop obsessively tracking total daily protein grams as your only metric, and instead start counting how many times a day you actually cross the real threshold. The target for most adults over 60 is somewhere in the range of 30 to 40 grams of quality protein per sitting, and the goal is to cross that threshold roughly 3 times a day, not once. Eggs with the yolk included, poultry, beef, fish, lamb, a quality protein shake if whole food isn't practical in the moment, and critically, front load the very first one. Breakfast is where almost everyone over 60 quietly fails, whether that breakfast happens at 7 in the morning or closer to noon. And one more layer that multiplies all of this: resistance training appears to sensitize aging muscle tissue, making it more responsive to the amino acids you're feeding it. Protein plus mechanical loading is a far more powerful combination than either one alone, and it's one of the most underused levers in this entire conversation. None of this requires perfection or weighing every gram, it just requires knowing where the real threshold sits and touching it 3 times a day instead of once. The third hidden reason lives somewhere almost nobody thinks to look: your stomach. Even once you're covering the protein correctly, none of it matters much if your body can't properly break it down and absorb what it needs. There's a persistent myth floating around that as people get older they start producing too much stomach acid, which is part of why so many people reach for antacids as a daily habit. For a large number of older adults, the reality is closer to the opposite. Many people experience a natural decline in stomach acid production as they age, a condition sometimes referred to as hypochlorhydria, and lower acid levels can interfere with protein digestion and with the absorption of key nutrients like vitamin B12, iron, and calcium. This can sometimes show up indirectly through markers like elevated homocysteine on routine blood work, which is worth asking your doctor about if you're curious. Here's how the chain reaction tends to work. Vitamin B12 in food arrives tightly bound to protein, and stomach acid along with a digestive enzyme called pepsin has to physically separate the two before your body can actually use the B12. Without adequate acid, that separation doesn't happen properly, and the B12 can pass through mostly unused. Chronic inflammation that reduces acid-producing cells in the stomach, sometimes called atrophic gastritis, is thought to affect a meaningful percentage of people over 60, and vitamin B12 deficiency is estimated to affect somewhere around 1 in 10 older adults, often without the classic textbook signs like anemia. What people often notice instead is a cluster of vaguer symptoms: persistent fatigue, brain fog, memory that feels less sharp, trouble with tasks that used to feel automatic. It's worth being very careful and precise here, because this is an area where clarity matters, A B12 deficiency can sometimes produce cognitive symptoms, memory lapses, slower thinking, difficulty concentrating that on the surface can resemble something more serious, and this is exactly why a simple blood test matters so much, because a deficiency-related issue is generally correctable once identified, in contrast to other causes of cognitive change that require a completely different approach. I am not a doctor and this is not a diagnosis of anything, but I want to be very direct about this. If you or someone you love has noticed changes like this, the right move is a conversation with a physician and a simple blood panel, not guessing, and definitely not self-treating based on a YouTube video. It also matters that certain acid-reducing medications, when used long-term, have been associated in research with a higher likelihood of B12 deficiency, so if you're on one of these medications long-term, that's a worthwhile and completely reasonable question to raise at your next doctor's visit rather than a decision to make on your own. On top of that, lower stomach acid can allow certain bacteria to grow more than they normally would in the stomach and upper small intestine, and those bacteria can compete for the B12 you do consume before your body gets the chance to absorb it. So what can you actually do here? Consider asking your doctor about checking your B12 and homocysteine levels at your next routine visit, simply so you have a real number instead of a guess. If a deficiency shows up, your doctor may recommend a B complex or a specific B12 supplement, and that's a conversation for them, not for me. Beyond that, there are gentle, food-based habits that may support your body's natural digestive process. A small amount of diluted apple cider vinegar before a meal, a splash of lemon or lime in water, a digestive enzyme with protein-heavy meals if your doctor is comfortable with that, and something as simple as slowing down, actually chewing, and eating without rushing through a stressful moment can meaningfully support how well you absorb what you're eating in the first place. You can do everything right at the fork and still come up short at the cellular level if digestion itself has quietly slowed down, which is exactly why this reason so often hides behind the other four instead of announcing itself directly. Now, before I get into the fourth reason, because this next part connects directly back to that immune function thread I asked you to hold onto earlier, I want to pause for one quick moment and mention that this video is supported by today's sponsor, who I'll keep this brief on so we can get right back to the science, because that's what you're actually here for. If you've been following along and thinking about the sleep piece of all this, because your body does almost all of its real repair work while you're asleep, not while you're awake worrying about it, a magnesium-based nighttime formula is one of the simpler, well-studied additions some people in this age range look into with their doctor, since deep sleep tends to get lighter and more fragmented with age, right at the exact moment your body needs that repair window the most. I'll leave a link in the description if you want to look into it yourself and decide if it's right for you. And now let's get back to that immune function thread I asked you to hold onto earlier, because this is exactly where it resurfaces. The fourth hidden reason is what researchers sometimes call inflammaging, a chronic, low-grade, largely invisible inflammation that runs quietly in the background of the body, often without any obvious symptoms at all, and it turns out to be one of the sharper predictors we currently have of how someone's health trajectory unfolds. In the well-known INCHIANTI study, elevated levels of two inflammatory markers, IL-6 and CRP, were linked to mortality risk over the following 3 years in older adults who, on the surface, were simply going about their normal lives with no idea anything was elevated. In a separate study looking at over 1,000 hospitalized older adults with a median age around 84, a composite inflammation score was independently linked to a substantially higher mortality risk over the following decade when comparing the highest scores to the lowest. And here is the piece that ties this whole video together: that same background inflammation appears to directly erode muscle. In a study following more than 800 healthy older adults from a well-known long-running cohort, Researchers measured IL-6 levels at age 70 and then measured grip strength and muscle size a few years later, and the inflammation measured earlier showed up later in weaker muscles. Look at what that actually means when you stack it against everything else in this video. Reason 1 drains your muscle through inactivity. Reason 2 blocks the signal that would normally rebuild it. Reason 3 can quietly choke off the raw materials your body needs to do the rebuilding. And reason 4 burns through what's left in the background while you sleep, whether you feel it happening or not. This isn't 5 unrelated problems. It's really one interconnected problem showing up through 5 different doors. So what can you actually do? A simple, inexpensive blood test called high sensitivity CRP, or HSCRP, is worth asking your doctor about at your next visit. It's a marker many people have simply never had checked. Generally, lower is considered better, and your doctor can help you interpret exactly what your number means for you specifically. From there, the levers that most consistently show up in the research around lowering background inflammation are the ones you'd probably guess: prioritizing consistent, quality sleep, reducing highly processed foods and added sugar, favoring whole food fats like olive oil over heavily processed seed oils, building and maintaining muscle through regular resistance work, and reducing excess visceral fat around the midsection specifically, since that particular fat tissue doesn't just sit there passively, it actively produces inflammatory signaling molecules that circulate throughout the rest of the body. None of these levers are exotic or expensive. Inflammaging is just easy to ignore because it rarely announces itself with a symptom you'd recognize, which is exactly why it deserves a number on paper instead of a guess. Now for the 5th and final hidden reason, and this is the one fact I genuinely want you to text to somebody today, because I think it's one of the most quietly important findings in modern longevity research and almost nobody has heard of it. The PURE study followed nearly 140,000 adults across 17 countries over roughly 4 years, making it one of the largest studies of its kind ever conducted, and one of the things they measured was remarkably simple: grip strength, using a small handheld device called a dynamometer that you simply squeeze as hard as you can. For every 5 kilograms of lost grip strength, roughly 11 pounds, all-cause mortality risk rose by about 16%. Cardiovascular death risk rose by around 17%. Stroke risk rose by about 9%. And here's the line I think deserves to be printed and taped inside every doctor's office in the country: in this research, grip strength turned out to be a stronger predictor of both all-cause mortality and cardiovascular mortality than systolic blood pressure, the exact number your doctor checks at nearly every single visit. And this held up even after researchers adjusted for age, smoking status, exercise habits, and a long list of other factors. Your handshake, in a very real statistical sense, told researchers more about long-term health outcomes than the blood pressure cuff did. And this pattern held true across every income level, every region, and every country studied. The reason appears to be that grip strength isn't really just about your hands at all. It reflects vascular health, nervous system function, and overall cardiorespiratory fitness all at once, essentially functioning as a quick snapshot of how well multiple systems in your body are aging together. Researchers have started describing it as a kind of functional vital sign, and an editorial published alongside the original PURE results in The Lancet suggested it may act as a broader biomarker of aging across a person's entire lifespan. So what should you actually do with this? A hand dynamometer costs around $20 online. Test your grip, write the number down, and test it again in 90 days. That number becomes a simple, honest report card that doesn't care how good your other numbers look on paper. The most effective ways to build grip strength tend to be refreshingly simple: farmer's carries, where you simply hold something heavy in each hand, a kettlebell, a loaded backpack, even a couple of grocery bags, and walk a short distance, set it down, rest, and repeat. If it's appropriate for your current fitness level and you have access to a bar, dead hangs are another excellent option, hanging from a pull-up bar for as long as you comfortably can, resting, and repeating, and if hanging with your feet off the ground isn't accessible yet, keeping your heels lightly on the ground while you hang still provides real benefit. Watching that number climb over a few months is one of the most concrete, honest signs of progress you can track, and it has nothing to do with how you feel on any given day. You don't need a gym or a coach to move it, just a handful of heavy objects and a few minutes a week, and the feedback loop is faster and more honest than almost anything else you could measure at home. The researchers behind the original Stanford aging study made a point of saying that the 40s and 50s represent a genuinely important window for people to start paying closer attention to their health, well before any of this becomes urgent. And one line from that research team has stuck with me since I first read it: the idea that we should try to adjust how we live while we are still healthy, not after something forces our hand. I think about that constantly. Being proactive is fundamentally easier, cheaper, and less painful than being reactive, and yet almost everyone waits for the diagnosis, the fall, the scary lab result, before they change a single habit. The step at 60 is real. The data behind it is real. But a step is not the same thing as a cliff. A step is something you can see coming, prepare for, and simply lift your foot over, as long as somebody shows you where it actually is. Most people only ever get shown the step after they've already fallen through it. The entire point of laying this out now is so you get to be the rare exception. So here's what all of this actually adds up to in practice: load your legs with real resistance at least twice a week, and never let a sick week quietly turn into a lost month of strength. Cross a real protein threshold 3 separate times a day instead of leaning on one large meal to carry the whole day. Ask your doctor about checking your B12 and homocysteine levels at your next visit, especially if fatigue or brain fog has crept in without an obvious cause. Ask about a simple HSCRP test to get an honest read on background inflammation instead of assuming your labs tell the whole story. And pick up a $20 grip strength tool and actually track the number over time, because it may be quietly telling you more than almost anything else on your chart. Marcus started with exactly 3 of those 5 changes. He didn't overhaul his life overnight, he simply picked the 3 that fit his actual schedule and stuck with them for 90 days. 90 days later, he called me and told me, almost laughing, that the cement finally felt like it had lifted. Nothing about him had been broken the whole time. Something had simply been blocked, and once it wasn't anymore, his body did exactly what it was designed to do. If there's someone in your life over 60 who keeps hearing your labs look fine while quietly feeling like something is off, send them this video. That gap between fine on paper and actually feeling well is exactly what this was built to close. And if this breakdown was useful to you, the best thing you can do right now is subscribe and turn on notifications, because I'm going deeper into how to build each of these 5 habits, step by step, in the videos coming right after this one.